At dawn, the earth was silent. No war cries, no movement. Just 250 native warriors standing like shadows, encircling a lone cabin in the snow. Inside, a cowboy holds his rifle, but not for himself. The night before, he found her half dead in the frost, a woman who should have been left to fate. Now they've come for her, believing he stole her. But she wasn't taken, she ran. And in the space between justice and survival, one man has to decide: protect the truth or stay alive. Would you open the door or hold your ground? The snow whispered against the walls, a hush so deep it made even the wind seem reverent. Frost had seized every plank of the cabin, curling into the edges of the lone window like fingers trying to claw their way inside. Inside, the air was brittle. A fire long dead left only the ghost of warmth. The cowboy stood still as stone, rifle cradled low but ready, eyes locked on the tree line beyond the frostbitten glass. His breath fogged slow and heavy, the only sign he was still alive. Before we ride deeper into this standoff at dawn, and the truth that turned one act of mercy into a war of silence, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling the stories left behind in the snow, the ones no one dares to speak aloud. For you, it's just a click. For us, it's the reason we can keep walking into the fire. Thank you. Dawn hadn't broken yet, not fully. Just a pale bruise along the eastern horizon, a suggestion of light rather than the promise of it. He shifted slightly, boot creaking against dry wood, and then stilled again. They were out there. He knew it before he saw them. Knew it from the way the birds had gone quiet, from the strange tension in the air, like the land itself had drawn in a breath and hadn't exhaled. Then he saw them. At first, it looked like the trees had multiplied. New trunks, too narrow, too still. Then the light rose just enough to betray them shadows where there had been none. Shapes crowned in eagle feathers and wrapped in furs, standing motionless at the edge of the world. Then another, closer. Then 20. Then 50. In every direction. 250. Encircling. No drums, no chants, no war cries to shatter the cold. Just that terrible, sacred silence, like death itself had come not with fury, but with patience. He didn't flinch, didn't curse, just watched. One hand clenched the wood of his rifle stock harder, his knuckles whitening. The other remained near the window pane, fingers twitching like he was about to lift it and shout, but shout what? Inside the cabin, behind him, the woman stirred in the cot. A thin blanket covered her, drawn tight around shoulders that still trembled from the frost. She didn't speak, didn't rise, but he felt her watching him. He turned his head just slightly, not enough to break eye contact with the tree line. "Don't move," he said, low, almost reverent. She didn't answer, just drew the blanket closer. He looked back out. They weren't moving, none of them. Warriors, all of them, cloaked and painted, and holding the stillness of a people who understood time differently. The sun breached the ridge slowly, casting a gold sheen over the snow and catching the glint of steel and bone. One man took a step forward. Just one. The cowboy raised the rifle, slow and sure. Not to fire, not yet. If they wanted vengeance, he muttered, voice dry and low like gravel, they'd already have it. So why wait? The camera pushes in. On his eye. On the lone figure standing in the center of a tightening noose of silence. The moon hung low over the valley, a silver coin lost in a sky smeared with ash and starlight. Snow muffled every sound except the slow crunch of hooves. The cowboy rode with his shoulders hunched against the cold, wool coat stiff from ice, hat brim dusted in white. His horse snorted plumes of steam with every breath, each step laboring deeper through the drifts. The world was quiet in that dangerous kind of way, too still, too clean, like it was waiting for something to break. He didn't expect to see her. It was just the briefest flicker at the edge of the creek, something off about the line of snow, like it had shifted when it shouldn't have. He pulled the reins and dismounted slowly, boots sinking. The horse sidestepped nervously, ears flattening, already sensing what he hadn't yet. She was crumpled there, half buried, limbs twisted like a rag doll tossed from a great height. Dark braids clung to her cheeks, frozen stiff. Her face was the color of old ivory, lips blue, eyes shut tight. Snow had formed a mask over her shoulders, blending her into the ground. If not for the faint rise of her chest, she could have been a statue. He stared for a long moment. No movement around, no camp nearby. Just her. Alone. The horse whinnied and backed away, hooves thudding against the icy ground. He crouched. Her fingers were curled inward, skin cracked. She wore no gloves, just thin deerskin, soaked through and frozen stiff. She must have been walking all day, maybe longer. He touched her wrist. Barely a pulse. Her breath came in faint, broken threads. He looked back at the horse, then the ridgeline. He knew what it meant taking her in. The lines were too sharply drawn out here. This was no neutral ground. A white man carrying a native girl across his saddle didn't end with questions. It ended with blood. But still, he slid his arms under her and lifted. Her body was light, disturbingly so, like the cold had already started to take pieces of her. She made no sound, but her head lolled slightly against his shoulder. The wind picked up as if to protest. He got her onto the horse, mounting behind, one arm wrapped around to keep her from slipping. The ride back was slow, long, tense. Her breath barely stirred against his chest. Inside the cabin, he kicked the door shut behind him and laid her on the cot. His fingers were already numb as he fumbled for kindling. A fire bloomed. Not much, but enough. He stripped off her soaked moccasins, unwrapped her raw feet. Rubbed snow against the frostbite heat would kill her faster. He wrapped her in every spare blanket he owned, then sat beside her with his rifle across his lap and eyes on the door, just in case something had followed. She didn't wake, not even once. But he stayed up anyway. His hands trembled not from cold, but from something older. A memory he didn't want to name. A brother left behind, a promise unkept. This time, he didn't walk away. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story. But something in him had cracked open when he saw her broken there in the snow. And maybe that was enough. The moon had risen high and mean, casting a pale light that glinted off the snow like shards of broken glass. Trees stood in tight silence along the ridgeline, their black arms reaching, gnarled and knowing. Somewhere in that stillness, a whisper was stirring, one that would move faster than fire and cut deeper than ice. The satchel was found first. A boy discovered it by accident, out gathering kindling near the old elk trail. Half buried in snow, the leather bag had been torn at the strap, the contents scattered her stitching knife, a scrap of braided cord, a small carved token split clean down the middle. The boy recognized the pattern on the hide. Everyone would. It was her father's mark, inked into the leather by her own hand. He didn't touch it, just ran. By the time the first men arrived, more signs had revealed themselves. Hoofprints pressed deep in the snow, erratic, overlapping riderless at times, then mounted again. Bare footprints, small and unsteady, veering away toward the creek. Blood drops. Not much, but enough to quicken every pulse. The elders said nothing. But their faces hardened. One warrior knelt near the prints. She was here, and she was running. Another studied the direction the tracks disappeared. But she didn't make it far. Within the hour, the message had passed from mouth to mouth, village to village. No shouts, no alarms. Just eyes narrowing, hands tightening on spears and bows, horses saddled without a word. The girl was missing. Not a sister, not a cousin. A daughter, the daughter. And her father's silence on the matter was louder than any order. They knew whose land she'd vanished on. They knew who lived in that lonesome valley near the creek. White man, no family, no kin. A cabin set too far from any law to call for help. No one had seen him ride into town in weeks. No one had seen her since dawn. The call to gather was not ceremonial. It was primal, old, and absolute. One by one, they moved through the woods. Some came on foot, some on horseback, all cloaked in the same brutal understanding: this was no search. It was a response. By the time the first light touched the treetops, they would number in the hundreds. And he would never hear them coming. Inside the cabin, the cowboy crouched near the fire, feeding it slowly. Her fever had broken, but her skin was still too pale. He'd wrapped her feet again and laid another blanket over her frame. Her brow furrowed in some dream she hadn't escaped yet. She hadn't spoken since he brought her in, and part of him wondered if she ever would. He didn't know she was being looked for, didn't know what he'd walked into. He only knew she was alive, and that felt, for the first time in a long while, like a reason to stay put. Outside, past the hills and down the long ridge trail, silence moved like a tide. Bows were strung, knives tested against calloused thumbs. There would be no speeches. Just justice, carved from snow and silence. The door creaked on its iron hinges as he pushed it open, the cold rushing in like a silent accusation. The sky was still dark, not black but bruised, a deep, aching blue that meant dawn wasn't far off but hadn't yet arrived. His breath spilled out in clouds, curling into the cold. He stepped into the snow with the easy habit of a man who had done this 100 times. Collect wood, bank the fire, survive the morning. The wind had died sometime in the night. Now the world held its breath. He reached the woodpile and crouched, brushing off a thin crust of snow from the logs. Then something shifted. Not sound. Not exactly. More like a pressure. The sense that he wasn't alone. That the trees had grown eyes. He straightened slowly, hands still on the timber. Then he saw it. A shadow, just a flicker between two trunks. Motionless, but wrong. Too vertical, too still. Then another, and another. His spine went rigid. 20 paces out, tucked between pine and fir, they waited. Not moving, not speaking. Their outlines ghostly but real, figures crouched low. Others standing, faces half hidden by feathers, fur, and frost. His eyes scanned left, then right. More appeared. And more. It was like watching the trees themselves exhale warriors. He stepped back once, twice, then turned and walked to the door with the kind of slow, deliberate pace a man uses when he realizes that running won't help anymore. The moment his boots crossed the threshold, he slammed the door shut and bolted it, pressing his back to the wood like it might hold the mountain off. She was sitting up, blankets pulled around her shoulders, face hollow and pale, but alert. Her dark eyes were locked on his, wide but not surprised. "They're here," he said, voice low, breath ragged. She nodded once. Her lips were chapped, cracked at the edges. Her voice, when it came, was soft. Matter of fact. "I know." He crossed the room and grabbed the rifle, checking the chamber even though he already knew it was loaded. His hands weren't shaking, not yet, but his jaw was tight, teeth grinding without thought. "You should have left me," she said. He stopped, turned to face her. "What?" "You should have left me there, in the snow." Her voice wasn't angry, not bitter, just resigned, like someone reading a sentence that had already been written. He looked at her a long time, then paced to the small window near the stove. Frost rimmed the glass, but through it, he could see them now. Fully formed, watching, unblinking. The circle had closed in the night while he'd fed her broth and watched her chest rise and fall. The trap hadn't sprung, it had simply arrived. He exhaled, long and quiet. "You were dying," he said. She pulled the blanket tighter. "I still might be." They stood like that, strangers caught in the middle of a storm that neither had started, each waiting for the first sound to crack the silence outside. But none came. Not yet. The first sound came just after the light touched the treetops, a single crunch of snow, deliberate and slow, drawing near. The cowboy was already standing by the door, rifle in hand, watching the shapes beyond the frost-glazed window. For hours they'd been statues, unmoving in the dawn light. Now, one figure peeled forward. The man who approached wasn't young. His face was lined like old leather, every crease carved by wind and war. He wore no war paint, no weapons drawn. Just a staff in one hand and a steady gaze that never left the cabin's door. He walked with the calm of someone who did not need to rush, who knew the weight of his presence spoke louder than any voice ever could. The cowboy opened the door just a crack, enough to let sound through but not steel or arrow. His eyes met the older man's across a space thick with cold and consequence. The messenger didn't shout. He simply said, "Send her out." The cowboy held his breath. Behind him, he could hear the woman stirring, rising slowly from the cot. She stood now, wrapped in his blanket, eyes fixed on the doorframe. She didn't say a word. "She's alive because I found her," the cowboy replied. The old man nodded once. "And she belongs with her people." There was no threat in the words, just a statement, a truth carried like a knife inside the calm. She didn't ask to be found. Still, she said nothing. She didn't come forward, didn't offer him defense or gratitude. The silence between them filled the room like smoke. The old man's eyes narrowed. "You don't speak for her, and you don't keep what isn't yours." The cowboy gritted his teeth. "And what happens if I hand her over?" "She returns to judgment," the man said. "Judgment," the cowboy repeated, flatly. "Not safety." The elder did not blink. He looked over the cowboy's shoulder, just once, as if he could see through the wood to where she stood, barefoot and silent. Then, softly, "You have until the sun is above the pines." He turned and walked back the way he'd come. No signal, no cry. And yet, the circle of warriors shifted subtly as he returned, closing in, ever so slightly, like the draw of a noose that hadn't yet tightened. The cowboy shut the door. "She still hasn't said anything," he muttered. He turned to her. "Are you gonna tell me what they want with you?" She looked at him, her face calm, almost detached. "They want me to return, that's all." "That's not all," he snapped. "You know what they'll do." She didn't deny it. He stared at the floor, breath shallow. Then, almost to himself, "Would you have let her freeze, knowing what she was?" She sat back down on the cot, still watching him. "I didn't ask you to save me," she said. He sat too, the rifle laid across his knees now, useless in a standoff with honor and silence. The sun was rising, time bleeding away. If you were him, would you hand her back? The fire had burned low again, hissing quietly beneath the weight of ash. The cabin had gone still, except for the wind rattling faintly at the shutter and the steady tread of boots pacing wooden planks. The cowboy moved in tight circles, hands clenched, jaw set, staring now and then at the closed door like it might burst open any second. The rifle lay propped beside it, still loaded, still clean, but now feeling more like an ornament than a tool, a symbol of control he no longer had. Behind him, she sat near the fire, legs drawn in beneath the blanket. Her face was turned away, toward the window, though she never got too close. Outside, shadows still moved slowly, deliberately, just enough to remind him they were still out there, still waiting. "They think I took you," he said finally, voice rough. "That I dragged you here." She didn't respond. He turned. "You want to tell me what the hell's going on, or am I supposed to guess until they decide to burn this place down?" Still nothing. He took a step toward her, then stopped himself. "I gave you shelter. I patched your feet. I stood between you and 100 arrows. You gonna let me die blind?" Only then did she speak. "I ran," she said quietly. He blinked. "I wasn't taken, I ran." She turned to face him fully now. Her voice was steady, but something flickered behind her eyes, rage, maybe, or something colder. "They want me back because I shamed him," she continued. "My father. I was promised to the son of another chief, a joining of blood, an alliance. I was the price, so I ran." The room felt colder suddenly, despite the fire. "They think you took me?" he asked. She nodded. "And if you send me out there," she said, "that lie becomes truth. He'll kill me to undo it." He stared at her for a long moment, the storm inside him settling into a hard, still silence. "You should have told me." She shook her head. "Would it have changed anything?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then turned away, dragging a hand through his hair. Everything shifted with those words. He could feel it. This wasn't a rescue anymore. This wasn't a man doing what's right to save a stranger. He wasn't sheltering the weak, he was harboring the condemned. A fugitive in her own land. The line between him and them had thickened. He wasn't just in the way. He was the obstacle. The target. "Damn it," he muttered. Outside, a hawk screamed overhead, slicing through the frozen air. The cabin walls suddenly felt thinner, the wood brittle, the silence beyond them heavier. She stood now, slowly, her feet still unsteady, but she crossed the room with quiet resolve. "Don't give me back," she said. He looked up at her, something raw behind his eyes. "You're asking me to stand against them all. I'm asking you not to betray what you already did." And with that, the roles were clear. She wasn't the hunted anymore. He was the shield. By late morning, the light had hardened into something pale and pitiless. The snow no longer shimmered, it just sat there, cold and unmoved, stretching out from the cabin like a canvas waiting to be painted in blood. The cowboy had stopped pacing. He sat by the door, rifle resting across his thighs, eyes trained on the window but not seeing much anymore. He could feel it more than see it, the shift in atmosphere, the way the watchers outside had changed shape. The first group had been soldiers, young and ready, quiet with fury. But now something older had arrived, something heavier. The second circle. He stepped to the window and pulled the curtain back just an inch. They stood in robes of buffalo hide and dark wool, most with staffs or carved symbols hanging from their necks. Elders. Gray hair braided, faces painted, not for war, but for judgment. The warriors who'd first come now stood back slightly, forming a wide perimeter. The center was empty, left open for decisions. For sentence. The cowboy backed away from the window like it had burned him. "They brought a council," he said. She sat on the edge of the cot, motionless, eyes on the floor. He couldn't tell if she was scared or simply resigned. Maybe both. "They're not here to ask anymore," he said. "They're here to decide." She didn't answer. He crossed to her. "They think I'm lying." "You are," she said quietly. His jaw tightened. "You know what I mean." She looked up then, face unreadable. "They won't believe you, even if I speak." "They might." She shook her head. "They don't want truth, they want order." There was a knock, soft, rhythmic, but commanding. Not a demand, not a threat. An invitation. The kind that comes just before a verdict. He opened the door slowly, and the air rushed in with the scent of cedar smoke and iron. 3 elders stood before him. One stepped forward, her eyes sharp beneath the fur-lined hood. She spoke in her language first, then switched to his, each word deliberate. "The girl must speak." He didn't move. "She's not ready." "She is not a girl," the woman corrected. "She is a voice, and if she will not use it, the silence becomes yours." He swallowed hard. "I told you she wasn't taken," she ran. Another elder stepped forward. And why would she run? What would make a daughter flee her father's house in winter? "Ask her." "We are," the man said, and she says nothing. The cowboy looked back over his shoulder. She sat still, hands folded in her lap, eyes low. "Please," he said. But she said nothing. The elders waited for a time, watching the wind play across the snow like smoke from an unseen fire. Then the lead woman turned. "Until she speaks, your guilt stands." They walked away not in anger, but with the weight of inevitability. The cowboy closed the door, slower this time. When he turned back to her, he wasn't angry. He was afraid. "Why won't you say it?" She looked up at him, her voice barely audible. "Because my words won't save you." And still, outside, the circle held. The sun had climbed directly overhead, but the warmth it promised never came. Its light only made the stillness starker, the snow brighter, the silence louder. Inside the cabin, the air had thickened to something weightier than fear, uncertainty, brittle and aching. The cowboy stood with his back to the wall, the rifle now leaning useless in the corner. He knew by now that bullets weren't the currency that mattered. She still hadn't spoken. Outside, the council waited in that widening silence. No drums, no war cries, just patience stretched taut across hours. And then, at last, he remembered. He reached into the leather satchel he'd picked up that night, the one half buried by the creek. It had been slung over his saddle and forgotten in the panic. His fingers fumbled through the contents: a bone needle, a frayed pouch of dried herbs, a bundle of sinew wrapped in cloth. Then, at the very bottom, his hand closed around it. He drew it out slowly. A small carved eagle, no larger than a child's fist. Smooth lines, dark wood worn by time, and cracked clean down the middle. He turned it over in his palm, then looked up at her. "This was yours." She didn't move, but her eyes locked on the object like it had struck her. "You dropped it," he said. "Back at the creek." She stood slowly, legs trembling, not from the cold, but from whatever storm was beginning inside her. She took a step forward, voice quiet but clear. She paused. Then, with a finality that landed like a gunshot, "I broke it to be free." He stared at her, words caught somewhere between disbelief and awe. Her voice, so soft before, now seemed to reverberate through the wood. He opened the door and stepped outside, holding the token high in his hand. The elders turned, eyes narrowing, breath visible in the noon air. The carved eagle glinted under the sunday. "She says it was meant to keep her safe," the cowboy called out. "And she broke it herself." The eldest among them stepped forward. His eyes were deep-set and rimmed in gray, skin drawn tight against high cheekbones. He studied the eagle in silence. One of the women near him gasped softly when she saw it, not out of surprise but recognition. "It is her father's," the old man said at last. "He carved it the day she was born." The cowboy glanced back toward the cabin. "She says she broke it, that it was her choice to leave." The elder looked at him, then at the cabin, then finally over his shoulder. A new figure was approaching, slow, deliberate. A man taller than the rest, dressed in black fur and bearing no weapon. The warriors parted for him without a word. "Her father." He did not speak as he reached the edge of the circle. His gaze passed over the cowboy, settled on the token, then moved to the cabin beyond. There was no fury in his eyes, only something deeper. Something unreadable. The cowboy held the broken eagle out, palm open, waiting. Her father took it gently, studied the fracture, then looked toward the door she now stood in. For the first time since morning, the circle shifted not in threat, but in purpose. This was no longer a siege. It was a tribunal. The sun bled low across the valley, casting long, amber shadows through the trees, as if the land itself was exhaling after holding its breath all day. Smoke from the cabin's chimney curled into the dusk in soft spirals, fading into the darkening sky. The snow no longer glared white but glowed gently, touched by the fire-colored light of a day nearly done. The siege was over, though no treaty had been spoken aloud, and no apology given. What passed between them was older than language and quieter than peace. One by one, the council members turned away. No signal, no order, just a shared understanding. They left as they had come, silent, slow, certain. The warriors followed, stepping lightly through the snow, no longer surrounding the cabin, but scattering like smoke around it. The second circle dissolved. The pressure lifted. The old man who had once carved the eagle lingered a little longer. He stood still as the shadows crept up his legs, staring not at the cowboy, but at his daughter. She met his gaze without fear. There were no words between them, just the kind of stillness that only comes after something has broken and been left unrepaired. Then he turned and walked away, the broken token still in his hand. She watched until his figure vanished into the trees. Inside the cabin, the cowboy sat on the edge of his cot, fingers laced, eyes on the floor. His rifle leaned unused against the wall. The door was open. He hadn't moved to shut it. She stepped in slowly, brushing past the frame as if passing from one world into another. Her boots were his, too big, but dry, the blanket still around her shoulders. He didn't look at her right away. "So," he said finally, voice low. "I'm staying," she replied. He nodded. "Not here," she added. "Not with you." He allowed himself the hint of a smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes but still carried something like warmth. "Didn't figure you would." She crossed to the fire, kneeling beside it, feeding in 2 new logs. Flames jumped, casting dancing shadows across the walls. She didn't ask permission to use his firewood. She didn't need to. "I'll build near the creek," she said. He didn't argue. "This place," she glanced around, "it can be something else now." He finally met her gaze. "What do you mean?" "A waypoint," she said. "For the ones who run." A long silence settled between them again. But this one didn't ache. It didn't tremble. She stood, adjusted the blanket, and headed for the door. He watched her go, not stopping her, just watching. Not because he couldn't think of something to say, but because sometimes the right thing to say is nothing at all. She paused at the threshold, looked back once. "Thank you," she said. Then she was gone. The cabin sat alone again, but it no longer felt like a battlefield waiting for a war. It felt like something else, something not yet written. The fire crackled higher behind him. Mercy doesn't erase the past, but it redraws the map. Next time, the past comes riding back, and it doesn't ask for permission.